Welcome to How the World Works. I'm Kevin Williamson, a writer in residence here at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. This is a podcast where we talk about work, where we've talked about our jobs and jobs we've had in the past and jobs we might have had if we weren't doing what we're doing, and the meaning of work in our lives beyond just simply a way to get a paycheck and pay the mortgage and the rent and all that stuff. Today's guest is someone I have looked forward to talking with for some time. This is Magatte Wade. And she's okay if you say the last name Wade, because that's how it looks like it should be pronounced in English. But I'm trying to get close to the correct pronunciation. She was born in Senegal, raised mostly in France. An interesting immigrant story. She is an author, Heart of a Cheetah, which is a very interesting book that I recommend if you have any interest in Africa and entrepreneurship. And she is also an entrepreneur herself, a founder of a soft drink company, among many other ventures. So welcome. For folks who don't know, tell us a little bit of your sort of superhero origin story.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I've likewise been looking forward to speaking with you for quite some time as well. So thank you. So my just simple story is I was born in Senegal, the west coast of Africa, and right around age 2, my family made a decision to leave me behind as they were on their, my parents, as they were on their way to becoming economic migrants to Europe in search for a better job, talking about jobs, in order to provide us with a better life, to provide me with a better life. I was their first one, and we're four siblings. My parents went away, and after some years later, they came back for me because the immigration journey had worked. So they came back for me to get me to go back and be with them in Europe. At that point, they were in Germany, and then after a couple of years in Germany, the family moved, to France, because if we're going to stay in Europe, because of many historical ties that France and Senegal have, we used to be their colony. My parents thought it would be a better idea to be in France for all of those reasons. And so France is really where I was mainly, raised and educated. And eventually after business school in France, I decided that business school would be too small for my ambitions, and I moved to the United States because it was the land of opportunity. And opportunity abound everywhere. Definitely it's been opportunities everywhere since I've come here. So from that standpoint, I am very super duper grateful to America, and I just want for this country to remain the land of opportunity that it is. In addition to that, I work to ensure that other places around the world also become places of opportunities. So I did it very quickly because I'm sure we'll have a chance to go back and forth. But on a nutshell, that's my story. I became an entrepreneur being in this country, and today I also try to work so that more entrepreneurs can be fostered around the world, especially in my side of the world, back home in Africa.
So from ages 2 to 7, you didn't really see your parents then at all?
No. My grandma was my major caretaker, and I have to say those were, for the time that I remember of that stretch of my life, I remember having really a lot of fun being a free range kid, because I did not want to go to school, and my grandma said it was okay for me not to go to school. So I remember those moments very, very fondly. But that time of my life also was something happened that was also one of the worst times of my life to this day, and that would include having lost a husband somewhere later. But very traumatic experience was having to leave my grandma behind when it was time for me to go to Europe. So it's the level of trauma, at least the way I experienced it, is right there in terms of one of the worst episodes of my life, honestly.
Because you knew it's likely you would never be able to see her again, because travel not easy.
And once you're an immigrant, it's really hard. I mean, I was able to see her again later, but when my grandma passed away, I was not there, and I could not go to her funeral because of where the immigration process was for us. But still, I mean, when I was leaving, it was just like, what do you mean I'm gonna have to be without my grandma? I mean, I've been with her my whole life, and I have come to depend on her. I depended on her more than I depended on my parents, because remember, when my parents left at 2, I don't remember my parents. I didn't know them. So the only person that I remember consciously speaking of as my caretaker is her. And so for you, from one day to another, to be told you're leaving and she's not coming, it just made no sense.
Yeah, you may not have remembered your parents, but they remembered you. And I have a 2-year-old. And if you told me I had to go away for 5 years and not see him, I would resist that strongly.
Absolutely.
It's difficult, I think, to imagine the kind of economic desperation that forces people into making decisions like that.
Right.
And knowing that that probably is the best decision for the child and for the family, as difficult and tough as it is. And yet, around the world, millions of people every day have to make a decision like that at some point. Tell me a little bit about what the economic conditions were like at home before your parents left. I know you won't remember much of it, but surely you've looked into it. And what kind of work did your parents do?
So my mother was in charge of hospitality. So both my parents worked at five-star resorts, starting back home. And my mother was in charge of the hospitality experience, and my father usually would be the maître d'œuvre, so that's what they did. And later my father became a more like a CPA, type person when they got to Europe. But, when you say you don't remember what your country looked like when you were 2, the sad thing, Kevin, is not that much has changed.
Yeah.
What has changed, maybe we have more people, for sure. But in terms of, especially when you leave the capital city of Dakar, that's where maybe some of the new infrastructure is. Yes, we have some more roads, but the minute you leave the capital city, it's like time was stopped. It's like, and I don't know how long ago it was stopped. Probably it was stopped from, the end of colonialism. What that means is very much, if you just look at the village where we work today, where I have my manufacturing facility for our product, Skinny Skin, where when you look there, literally that town looks nothing different from the little town that I grew up with in Bourg. Nothing. It's the same unpaved roads. It's the same, people moving around using horse carriages still. It's many homes still that don't have running water. It is still, most homes don't have necessarily like the cooking stove. Like many people still can't afford even like the propane little tank that someone like me I can have in my home, because we still don't have pipelines, gas pipelines or anything like that. It's still the same. It's still most of the homes that you see, many of them except for a few, are not really finished even homes. It's like cylinder blocks, put together with cement and everything. And sometimes when people paint, they'll paint the front of the home, but the sides and everything you don't necessarily see. It's left to be gray, the cement gray, that it's in its natural color. So it's just that's pretty much in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of nothing has really changed. So and also the outrageous level of unemployment to this day. The little village where we are, for example, many kids are still to this day, for the most part, trying to migrate away. So see, the difference between my parents and today, the situation today, is when my parents were trying to get out. Back then, it was people of a certain age. You were not old, but you were not like 16 or 18 or 20. And today, so we're seeing like younger and younger and younger trying to leave. And we're also seeing families trying to leave. So when my parents left, at least they left me behind in the care of my grandma, not to take the risk. But today, it's like if my parents left with me as a 2-year-old in that boat, and so this is what people are doing. People are getting themselves into these little fishermen's boats, and they're trying to cross over to Europe in these little fishermen's boats. And every over 2 weeks or so, there is a story of a boat that capsized. And they see dead bodies in there. That's for the bodies that are still floating around. If not, many of them are at the bottom of the ocean serving as fish food. So they're seeing baby bodies in there. They're seeing little kids in there. This we used not to see. So if you ask me what has changed, I feel like the level of desperation has gotten worse. As a matter of fact, our GDP has really not grown that much. But the problem is, whatever the GDP was back in those days, people could probably still have a better, more purchasing power with that GDP back in those days, because obviously inflation and everything, things didn't cost the same amount of money. Now imagine if you barely have even double your GDP in 60 some plus years. I mean, the cost of things 60 some plus years are radically different. So with barely just a little more in GDP, you're trying to have to survive in this new modern world. So your purchasing power has gone way down. And so maybe that's what explains that people are just like, I need to get the hell out of here. And so the reason why they're leaving is because we don't have these jobs that provide people with these incomes with which they can really truly live decent lives. And so when you ask me, Magatte, what's the situation? I would say that in so many ways, the situation is worse for the ordinary people. Now, of course, do we have in Senegal and in many African nations, listen, people who are driving cars that Americans haven't even seen, because some of these are custom made and all of that. Yeah, we have people like that. We definitely do. We have people who are jetting around all over the world, all of that. We do have those people. And there is a little bit, of folks who have some type of, who are middle income. We do have some of those people. So I'm not saying that we're a land of destitute, but I'm saying that the ordinary Senegalese, and certainly the ordinary African, it's not great. It's really not that great.
Yeah, I've not been to Africa, so I don't have any firsthand experience there. But I worked in India in the 1990s, and it was a similar kind of thing to what you're talking about. There was a kind of almost time machine effect. Mm-hmm. If you were in Delhi or you were in Bangalore or someplace like that, it was. There were cities with problems, obviously, but sort of identifiable modern cities. And then you drive 2 hours out into the countryside, and you could be in the 1700s. You could be in the early 1800s, and What that made me think of often is the radical transformation of the American South in a relatively short period of time. Mm-hmm. So my parents were born in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. And in the American South in the 1930s, the majority of houses didn't have indoor plumbing. There were a shocking number that still didn't have electricity, those sorts of things. Conditions that we would associate now with what we call the developing world. Although the problem with that part of the world is that a lot of it's not developing, and we wish it were. So maybe that's not the best way of describing it. Mm-hmm. But in a relatively short period of time, essentially from the era of World War II through about the late 1950s, 15 years, 20 years, depending on how you want to date it, there was just a really radical transformation in the material standards of life in the American South, where outdoor outhouses more or less disappeared. Mm-hmm. Although not as quickly as you would think. I remember my father saying that he was a senior in high school before he lived in a house that had indoor plumbing, and that would have been 1957, I guess, maybe 1956. And but all that stuff just sort of disappeared, and now you go through the South, and it's not only is it not different from the rest of the country, of course, but the whole country has progressed in certain kinds of ways. And if you go back and even read American novels that were written in the 1970s, the 1980s, just the sense of the difference in material standard of life you get is just really amazing. Or television shows from that era where people were worrying about things like the price of butter. And I've never met anyone in my adult life who notices the price of butter. Gasoline, sure. We'll argue about the price of gasoline all day, but some of this other stuff that was was an urgent economic matter for people who thought of themselves as middle class at that point, and it's just not anymore. And I have a whole little lecture on this I won't go into, but one of my favorite little bits on this is I really like The Count of Monte Cristo, the Dumas novel, and there's a section in the middle where he has this dinner party, and they spend just pages and pages and pages explaining his preparations for this dinner party, and it's described as a quote-unquote millionaire's whim. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing is that he was able to serve two different kinds of fish at the same party. Mm-hmm. And this was thought to be just amazing. And, of course, you go into a Walmart in a poor part of the country now, and there's 60 kinds of fish or whatever it is, or 500, depending on where you are. Mm-hmm. So our expectations, of course, change very, very quickly. And what I've seen, in South Asia, what I've seen in Latin America in my travels there and some other parts of the world, isn't a sense so much that something happened to these places, is that something didn't happen.
Exactly.
So as Thomas Sowell and other people have said, variations on this thing, there are no causes for wealth, or for poverty, rather. Poverty is
Yes,
just the
poverty.
natural state of human beings.
That's right.
There are causes for wealth. There are causes for prosperity. And as the rest of the world changed in this radical kind of way, particularly in the 20th century, and these places sort of stagnated. And then you get to the United States and you get to Germany and the Western world, and you notice that there are just really basic differences in the forms of economic organization, particularly when it comes to something we care a lot about here at CEI, which is the matter of regulation.
Right.
So what was the first thing that really struck
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, so when I was 7, arriving in Germany, I've never left my village, I've never left my country, I've never left my continent. I mean, it was all first, everything. And then I arrived in Germany, and I remember looking around, and then I was just like, I was really taken aback. It was so shocking. Because think about it. I mean, put yourself in my shoes. Here I'm arriving, and I'll never forget this moment when my mom says, "Oh my God, it's time for your shower," and I'm like, "Where's the bucket of hot water?" And she's like, "Come on." Well, I guess for people who don't understand what's going on here is that back home, when grandma would talk about when it was time for me to take my shower, and I would take my shower every day, when it was time for me to take my shower, I knew that between the moment grandma told me that I'm gonna have to take my shower, I had a good 45 minutes to an hour to go play. Really, it was not because again I was procrastinating. I just knew why, because grandma had to get this pot of a stove of coal going, and get it really hot, get it going. And after that, she puts a pot of water on the coals, wait for it to boil, and once it boils, then she takes it, transfers it into a much bigger bucket, plastic bucket, and then mixes it with cold water so it's at safe temperature for my skin. And then from there, somebody who's stronger than her would drag it to the shower area, and there at last, by now it's some 45 minutes to an hour, that I can finally take my shower with a smaller little pot, taking from the bucket back to my body, back and forth, and that's what shower meant. And so here, when mom is saying, "My God, it's time for your shower," I'm like, really? Seriously? Where's the bucket of water? It's so cold. I'm not getting butt naked in this cold weather. And she was just like, "Come on, you silly." And then I would jump in there, turn the knobs around, and the temperature's coming down, and the water's coming down at the temperature that I want. You can even have a different, pressure. And I was just like, I mean, literally, Kevin, it was like, what type of juju is this? I know when I say that people laugh, but it really felt like that. Like, what type of juju is this? And then it was like that about everything. It was like that about the paved roads compared to the non-paved roads that I had. I walk into this grocery store that had more bread types than my little brain could count, and it was just like, there's something really bizarre going on here. And I remember that my question was, how come these people have this and we don't? And it was so striking that it's literally a question that stayed with me. Like how kids can be very obsessed with certain things when it makes no sense. And because it made no sense to me. It made no sense. For me, life was what I knew. I could never have imagined this. And I'm like, what is this? And eventually, so it became the defining question of my life. And as I was growing up, the question became, it went from how come we have this and they don't. It became, how come some countries like mine and so many other in Africa are poor, while others like the US, Australia, New Zealand, you name it, are rich? That became the question. And along the journey, I've heard it all. I've heard people with a very straight face to this day invoke the IQ theory. To this day, even when I talk about overregulation in Africa being the reason why things are so problematic, I still see people too eager to post the IQ map of the world, where Africans, looks like we're the dumbest of the pack. So to this day, I have people, that's what they believe, and some of them have the ear of very influential people in Silicon Valley, like some billionaires, and these conversations are still happening. I have my own answers about that. We might go into that at some point. But so I heard that. I heard the malnutrition case. I heard the lack of education case. That there I say, do you realize that half of the graduates coming out of all the African universities can't find a job? And as a matter of fact, the more educated you are, and the more likely you are to be unemployed, and people open round eyes. We can go into that at some point too. Others think it's just because we're too lazy. You name it. So, Kevin, when you ask why is Africa still the poorest region in the world, what I discovered is you have two categories into which I could pretty much put all the responses that people throw at me. One category is where it's all about victimhood. It's about slavery, racism, colonialism, because the white people and the West is stealing your natural resources, and blah, 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 blah. Another category, I can only count it as inherently believing that there is something wrong with us Africans, whether it's the IQ fury, whether it's for your lazy fury, whether it's you're always fighting with each other fury. It's something about us that is inherently wrong about us. Those are the two categories that pretty much all the answers would fall into.
So your choices are between Marxism and racism.
Pretty much. Yes. Pretty much. And it's funny because when you look at the political spectrum, I almost like found it, at least on both extremes of a political spectrum in the US. If you look on the right, for the extreme side of the right, they go for the racism part. When you look at the left, the extreme corner of the left, they go for the Marxism side, right? And so, but those are the ones who seem to be talking the most about why Africa is where it is and why black people, and they dominate the rhetoric, right? And so, but I'm standing there and thinking to myself, if it's because of the racism thing, this whole thing that there is something inherently wrong with us, then how come my parents, the very same people, the minute they come the minute they arrived in Europe, all of a sudden they can self-actualize. Just like, the Mexican person, the minute they cross the border, their earning power is multiplied by 10. The same person in no time, just like this. So what's going on over here? So I'm thinking it has, that didn't make sense because of that. The part where something is inherently wrong with us. And then the part where it's all about the victimhood thing and, the Marxist thing, there I'm thinking to myself, listen, especially this colonialism thing, because that's something that the Africans are really attached to in terms of a big excuse as to why we are still the poorest region in the world today. We are poor because of colonialism. That's why we're still poor. Okay, well, then how come Ethiopia, which has never been colonized, for the longest time used to be the poster child for poverty in Africa? When I was growing up, the joke around was, oh, what's a chubby Ethiopian? Oh, I guess it's an Ethiopian showing off. That's the joke we had among ourselves. And because really that's how Ethiopia was known. And to this day, it's not like they're doing much better than the rest of the pack. Conversely, you have a nation like Botswana, which has been colonized, and Botswana is systematically one of the best performers in Africa. So I'm thinking to myself, that's not the reason either. So none of those make sense, except that I'm thinking to myself, the only variable in this equation, it seems like it's not about the people themselves, but it seems like it's about the place that they happen to be in or not. The minute that changes, I see a radically different outcome. So now I'm interested in understanding why is it that some countries, what is it about them that makes it that if people are there, they can thrive, and others conversely, if you're there, you cannot thrive. That's why the question became, how come some countries like mine are poor and others are rich? Because it's about the country. I didn't know what it was, but I know it's something about it. And so eventually I kept on going, and after Germany, like I said, family moved to France. After business school in France, I decided that France would be too small for my ambitions, because really the way the French system works is very top down, depending on which school you have gone to, university or whatever, and also how many for how many years you kiss the right asses, maybe you'll be able to make it to the next level. I'm like, there's no way, I'm not gonna live my life like this. I gotta get out of here. So that's when I looked around and I'm like, America is this land of opportunity. It's basically it's the movies that taught me that America was a land of opportunity. So Hollywood, from that standpoint, is a fantastic, ambassador for the country. Anyway, so I came to this
Do you know the
country.
famous story about the film The Grapes of Wrath?
The what? Oh
You
yeah,
know
yeah, les raisins de la colère. Yes, 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 yes.
yeah. So there was the
Yeah.
story is that they arranged it to be shown in the Soviet Union. Because about the Great Depression and the
Mhm.
desperation of American life. And the idea was it was going to be a big propaganda coup against the West. And of course, these Soviets are watching this movie and saying, "These are the poorest people in America, and they have their own car.
Yeah.
This is amazing. We definitely need to go there." There's a similar story about this television soap opera called Dallas, which was
Uh-huh.
about corruption of the oil industry in the 80s, which they also apparently allowed to be showed in the Soviet Union for a while, and people were just their servants live better than our doctors do. And yeah, maybe they're not the nicest people in the world, but that sure looks like something we'd like to have a piece of. You land in Germany, of course, at first, and it's a very different scene from where you're from. And it's interesting to me because, as you say, our everything we know about the world is limited by our own experience. And so if you ask an
Right.
American, kind of conservative libertarian like me for an example of an overregulated, um, heavy-handed kind of country that could be a lot more productive than it is, we might use Germany as an example. It'd be one of the ones that would leap to mind. I mean, it's a perfectly fine country, don't get me wrong, but they've got a big, public sector. They've got a big regulatory apparatus. But of course, coming from Senegal, it looks like, something out of Hayek. And then you go from France to the United States, and you get another sort of, kind of radical change in the relationship between the private sector and the public sector, and in just the ability of the economy to make room for dynamic new things.
Exactly, exactly. When I arrived in the U.S., there too I was shocked between the difference of standard of living between France and the U.S. And to this day, I can easily see that a middle class American actually has as good of a life as a upper class French person. It's just that too is very shocking. And even in this country, when people complain about poverty, I'm just like, you have no idea what real poverty is. And because, like you said earlier, oh, this is a way the worst American lives off. It's still way better than the best of us live. I mean, you still can have an AC even if it's attached to your window or whatever. I mean, the level of material still wealth that the poorest American still has compared to us, it's just rather astonishing. So oftentimes I try to encourage people to really have a better appreciation for what they have, however little they think it is. In any case, so when I arrived in America, I became a headhunter in the finance for companies like Google and Netflix. I was working for a headhunting firm, and those were my customers. And because I was the last one to arrive in the company, I used to have these companies because they were supposedly the crappiest. Because remember, they're like little companies that nobody knew. Everybody else, like the people who are established, the sales teams that were established at the firm, they were given the big banks because back in the days that's what more was more like lucrative and also safe. It's these big companies, they hire lots of people, and so me, because of my accent, you could barely understand what I was saying. I used to have this very thick French accent that nobody could understand, and it was also mixed with some British, English, because I didn't learn American. I learned British when I was learning English. So I was kind of I was the rookie given some of these accounts, like very French weird accounts. But as you can imagine, who laughed the most at some point? It was me because I had these areas. So in any case, there I was, and being in Silicon Valley, looking around me, basking into this highly entrepreneurial environment, it was just rather exciting. And I was obviously doing very well for myself, but somewhere along the line, I had a major existential crisis. Um, So the best way to understand it is here I was in America living my best life, a life that I would never, ever, ever have imagined in my wildest, craziest dreams. Here I am in Silicon Valley, living in Palo Alto, actually in Los Altos Hills by the time we bought our first home. It was Los Altos Hills is one of the most expensive zip codes in America, just to tell you how far I've made it with a pool, everything, and I was barely 25. It was like, whoa, all of this. And so this one day, as I often would do, I was heading down to Big Sur for a little drive, and during that time, like Big Sur on Highway 1, like one of the most beautiful stretch of drives that I know of in the world, and just glowing with gratitude and at how far I've come, at all the things I accomplished, thinking about my grandma, how proud she would have been, but then she would have also told you, I always knew my little Magatte would make it this big, whatever. And just basking in also so much of a gratitude for God and for all the people that God has put in my place, in my path, to help me along the journey, and just feeling so good, feeling so much gratitude, feeling so much joy. But then the moment I reach that height of joy, the very next second, everything would go dark in my head. This feeling was constant in my life. I still have it, but less and less, because I think now I'm working on it. But so that level of joy, heightened joy, was met right away with all of a sudden. It's almost like somebody switched off, just something in my head. It's like from light now I go to dark, and I know when the darkness happens, I also know what happens, because at the same time as the darkness happens, it's almost as if the weight of the world would start to come down on me. And those were very dark moment. They're scary moment. And usually what I would do is I would shove it all under the rug. So for those who are listening and now being like, what is she talking about? So what happens is whenever I find myself in a heightened state of joy and gratitude for the abundance that I am afforded to live in my life, then the very next second, I get overwhelmed with a feeling of sadness. Is not doesn't even begin to express it, but it's all mixed. It's sadness, it's grief, it's almost like the survival. When I read from people who talk about the survival, there is a word for it. Like the survivor's guilt.
Survivor's
Survivor's
guilt.
guilt. It's all of these things that are mixed in. And why is that? It's because I am, during those moments, I am reminded of these boats we talk about. I just told you about earlier. The amount of young people who pack themselves into little fishermen's boats trying to make it to Europe for a job, and the boat capsizes. When they don't use that, then it's a body dropping from an airplane because somebody thought it would be a good idea to hide into the landing gear of a plane. And somewhere above England, a body drops. And when the plane makes it to Charles de Gaulle in Paris, in Roissy Charles de Gaulle, they open the cargo section of the plane, and there is a frozen dead body because somebody thought it would be a good idea to hide in the cargo section of a plane, not understanding that once it goes up there, the temperatures are not, we can't survive them. And when those sea route, air route are deemed too dangerous, then people go land route. When they go land route, couple fates happen to them. I don't know, for people who follow these, I'm sure a few weeks ago you saw that in Tunisia, the Tunisians were going house to house, rounding up Black Africans, pulling them out of their homes, keeping their belongings, their paper, their pass, everything that they had, plus the money, whatever they made, and then they would take them to the border in the desert, and there, good luck to you. And that's for those who are stuck in Tunisia, but most of them are stuck in Libya because Libya has special deals with European nations to try to keep people out. So that's there is a lot of ways for them to catch the immigrants on their way to Europe. But what does it mean when you're being caught in Libya? Well, people are being sold right now as slaves. My price on the market is between $300 and $500. So then, Kevin, this is what I tell people. If this is what you know, and you lived with these stories, and they happen on a regular basis, There is not a month that doesn't go by that you are not aware of one of those situations. And this has been going on for as long as you remember having a memory. So I ask you, how would you not be haunted? Actually, the right word in my case is that I'm haunted. And so, of course, the minute you feel joy, the next second you're thinking about the people that you left back home. And for the longest time, the way I would cope with those moments of switch going off in my head was to tell myself, listen, this problem has been here way before you were born. And sadly, it's probably going to be here well after you're gone. So perhaps the best you can do is to try and live a good life for yourself. Try to see if you can do that, and that shall be enough. And if everybody tries to do the same, it is still better than what it would have been otherwise. But that day, Kevin, my body was not having it. You know, they say that the mind has an amazing ability to make sense of pretty much anything. That's how people would go and do, you know, what the Nazis asked them to do, whatever, and with a straight face tell you that, be able to reason all of that. But the body, they say, doesn't have that ability. And so that day, I think what happened is my body decided to separate from my mind. My body said to the mind, you can think, you can try to justify this all you want and to shove it under the rug, but us, we can't anymore. And literally, physically, I had like, my body was just was in trance, like shaking and everything. I almost had this terrible accident, you know, because down below it's the ocean. You know, I was heading south.
Done that drive many times.
Yeah, and you know some of these curbs, how they are. And I stopped the car as soon as I could, and I got out. And I fell to my knees, literally, because there was nothing left in my body. I mean, it was just this, and I literally just fell to my knees. And at that moment, my only instinct was to surrender to God. I did. And I said, God, this is too much pain. I don't know what to do, but from here on, I promise you that every breath you give me, every new day you give me, I want to put it towards the bettering of my country, my people, this continent of Africa. But I don't know what to do. You're gonna have to help me. But me, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show up, and everything you give me, I'm gonna put it towards that. And then so much peace came upon me. I got back in the car, turned around, drove home, and in my hearts of hearts, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. And indeed, nothing ever was the same again. A few months later, got married, took my husband to my country, Senegal. It's been 4 years I haven't gone home since then because of the whole immigration journey. My husband of then was Emmanuel Marchand, and he was a French guy from Normandy, and so he's never been to Senegal before. So I took him home to check it out, you know. And when we arrived, I remember he was like, "Hey, I want to get the real bissap," because I've been always talking about this bissap. I make it home. Bissap is this hibiscus drink, right? It's traditional drink of Senegal. Bissap, the Senegalese around the world, we are known for our teranga. Teranga means hospitality. And we have a juice that personifies it. It's this hibiscus drink. So you can imagine every home you go into, that's what you're welcomed with, traditionally. But now, it was not coming anymore on these trays. On the trays, they bring you Coke, Pepsi, Fanta. That's what they bring you on the tray. And for anyone else who's watching this, they might not see the problem, but I do. So, and when I saw what was going on, it sent me into a really bad place of... I was very upset because here I am looking, basically that tray to me represents the world. And those drinks on it represent different cultures of the world. Mine not being on that tray means my culture is being wiped out of the world. So that was a big problem for me. And at the same time, I was seeing that all the women who use to grow the hibiscus, which is the main ingredient for this drink, and it is primarily the women who grow this, are losing their livelihood because this juice is no longer the popular drink. So I'm sitting there and thinking to myself, and it's the same women whose children, younger children, maybe they're 18, 19, it's them now who are saying, look, mom is falling deeper and deeper into poverty. So I've got to do something. And what is that something? You get on that boat, you get on that plane, you go on those, you're probably going to be stuck in Libya otherwise. You see that cycle. So here I'm sitting now, I'm just like, God, I've got two problems now. On one hand, I have my culture disappearing in this situation, literally. And on the other hand, I had people dying. And it's all linked somehow. So for 3 days, my body was shot. It was not working anymore. I was just so disappointed. I was disappointed in everything. I was disappointed in life. And I was also raising my fist at God, which I know not to do, but sometimes it happens. And eventually, Emmanuel is like, Magatte, this energy, this anger of yours, it's energy, but it's negative energy. Can you see if you can turn this around where it becomes inspiration and where you use it to fuel yourself to do the right thing? And together with the fact that my father always trained us to think, my father's mantra for us was always criticize by creating. My father was like, I don't want to hear your problems. Don't come to me with your problems. If all you have is a problem or is a complaint, don't come. I don't want to hear it. I'm not going to listen to it. Now, I want to make sure that if you come to me with some of your issues, you better have thought about solutions as well. So criticize by creating. Yeah, Dad, I have a problem with this. Dad, I have a problem with that. And I think we should do this. And I think we should do that. And I'm going to do that. That's what, he wants. He's just like, be in solutions mode, because it might not be the best solution. You may not come up with the solution, but that's the only path to get to the solution. And so with that, and I got up and I'm thinking to myself, okay, all right, so I've got a problem. This drink is disappearing. The jobs are disappearing. The poverty is getting worse. Well, okay, Magatte, build a brand. And this, it was just like, I didn't just come up one to one like that. It's just like, I become very curious. When I become curious about things, I need to go back and research things. So when when it comes to culture, I had learned a thing or two before about brands. I'm just one of those things. I've always been a branding addict. And so I realized, for me, I've noticed that brands have a tremendous power to dictate our culture, for good or for bad. Brands get to decide, to tell us what's cool, what's not cool, and it's very powerful. They play a big role. They tell us what are even physical features that are acceptable. They decide everything. Culture is big time decided by brands. And so that's why and also the nice thing about it is so my plan was build a brand that and a company where the brand is going to have embedded in its DNA the very best of my Senegalese culture. The product would be this cultural product, which is the hibiscus drink, and you're going to put these women back to work. So at the height of all of this, we had put 9,000 women back to work. And in America, everybody was drinking Bissap, and it was like, wow, I know. So we succeeded in so many ways. But as that was happening, Kevin, another thing was happening. I was noticing something else, because we had a sister company in the US, a sister company in Senegal, and we had a mothership company in Cayman Island to link the two. There too, I was shocked at the discrepancy of the ease of doing business between Senegal and the United States. It was anywhere from how long it would take you to legally register the business. In one place, it would take you, back in the days, less than half a day, because you still had to fill out some paperwork, by hand or everything, because later we had the internet and all that. I mean, later everything was online, the Secretary of State's, website and everything. But less than half a day, you're done with filling this thing out. Back home, when I did this the first time, it was in 2003. We got it in 2004. It was in 2004. In America, it was quickly done. Like I said, half a day less. In Senegal, back then, it took almost 2 years to finish the process. The amount of money that had to be spent, you don't even want to go there either, because you had to have so many paperwork be signed, and be signed by a notary. Notary in civil law nation like mine it's almost like you're dealing with a lawyer. Very expensive. It's not notary here where you go $5 and somebody's literally just witnessing and putting a stamp. There, it's almost like a lawyer, So imagine having to deal with a lawyer for almost everything, all of these different steps that are involved. And then same thing with employment. Basically, The state gets to decide if you and I can get into employment. A doctor gets to tell you if you're physically fit to do the job you decided to do with me, even if it's a desk job. And so on and so forth. And it was like that about everything. Permit for this, license for that, everything. Meanwhile, in the US, I register in no time, bank account in no time, $20 all you need to open a bank account. That was back in the days, and you are in business. Now you're in business, you've got enough problems to deal with being an entrepreneur, let alone having to deal with all of this mess, nonsense that's caused by all of these laws and regulations you have to apply by. And when I saw this discrepancy in the ease of doing business, I thought to myself, oh, of course, it's because we're so poor that everything is so hard, and them it's because they're so rich that everything is so easy. Just come to think, when the minute you say that, you think to yourself, but wait a minute, you're poor because you don't have enough money. You don't have enough money because you don't have a source of income. A source of income for most of us is a job. Where do jobs come from? The private sector, these businesses. But do these businesses exist in a vacuum? I think not. What do they need? They need an enabling business environment. Oh, but wait. You told me that my country has a terrible business environment. And then I look and I'm like, is it only us? No, it's not. When you look at the Doing Business Index ranking of the World Bank or the Fraser Economic Freedom Index and many other indexes that measure more or less the same thing, you realize that Africa is a region in the world where entrepreneurs are the least free to enterprise. African nations are the ones that offer the least economic freedom to their entrepreneurs. And there, Kevin, I had it. If prosperity is solved by profit, if poverty is solved by prosperity, because like you said, poverty is the natural state of man. If poverty is solved by prosperity and not poverty alleviation, we have to be clear on that, and that prosperity is built by entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs need an enabling business environment, yet we have the worst ones in the world. There at last, I had my answer. Africa is the poorest region in the world because it happens to be the most over-regulated region in the world. So the lack of economic freedom is the reason why we are poor. If a nation, and that's when I finally discovered the relationship, because remember when I was saying it's about this place, what is it about these places that if you're here, you can make it, if you're there, if you're not, you cannot. It's because some of these places come with a certain threshold of economic freedom. And when that's the case, the magic happens of unleashing the wealth creators to create wealth for themselves and everybody around them and lift the society up. But when a nation does not offer that threshold of economic freedom to its citizens and the people who live there, then it's the reverse way. And so companies can't be built, at least not as many as you need can be built. The jobs that would have come with it are not there. The income those jobs would have provided are not there. The people are poor, and the country as a whole is poor. It makes so much sense, and that made sense. Yet, Kevin, tomorrow, start playing, start doing it. Ask the next 100 people that you see, or line 100 people, African, non-African, it doesn't matter. Ask them, why is Africa still the poorest region in the world? Everybody will have an answer, all right? Everybody will have an answer, because that's one of the biggest questions of people. Why is Africa still poor? And you ask them that, take note. Take note. And I promise you, each of those reasons is going to fall into one of those two categories I told you about. But do you know what you're not going to hear? Lack of economic freedom. The entrepreneurs cannot enterprise. You'll never hear that said by anybody. But I'm asking you, Kevin, if you don't have a proper diagnosis, how do you intend to come up with a right solution? And this is the problem of Africa. And that's what I try to explain in my book. I try to explain that to people because we are our poverty, our today's poverty is grossly misdiagnosed. Grossly. And it doesn't seem, and so that's why for me, being able to talk to people like you and put this story out there matters a great deal. And also the problem we have is that what we need, which is economic freedom, which is free market capitalism, is also something that mainstream media has a bias against. Academia has a bias against, and Hollywood certainly has a bias against. So how do you think we're going to get there if we don't try to counter that narrative first and be an advocate change? And then after that, then we talk about solutions as well, because we've got solutions.
Yeah. Something I've often thought about in the American context, and I think it's even more true of the rest of the world, is that we talk about these things in sort of strictly material terms, in terms of economic output and standard of living and all that stuff. And those things are obviously important, particularly if you're below a certain level. But in places like the United States and to a certain degree Western Europe, it's not that we've eliminated economic scarcity, but we've kind of got a handle on that. We, in terms of producing enough resources for everyone to have a decent, dignified life, we've got a handle on that. And I think about, pardon the nerd references here, but the Star Trek replicator. So in the Star Trek world in the future, there are these magical machines that'll just make anything you want. So there's no material scarcity. If you want a diamond that's 2 pounds, you can get a 2-pound diamond. If you want a blueberry pie, it'll make you a blueberry pie. Even in an environment where there is no material scarcity, we would still want these same economic reforms. We would still want to create an environment where entrepreneurs can do their thing, because the thing we really care about, beyond whether there's enough calories in the diet and enough roofs to put over enough heads, is human flourishing, is for people to reach their maximum potential and live the kind of lives they want to do as individual human beings. And when we look at terrible poverty we see in a lot of the world, in Africa, still in South Asia, still in Latin America, we think about it really in economic terms, and it's important that we think about it in those terms. But the terms I also think about it in, that I think maybe we should talk about more, is that there's an enormous tragedy there of people living lives that are not developed to their fullest. People who have all this potential and capacity who just don't get a chance to do those things. Years ago, it was the late 1990s, I was talking to a guy who was this very right-wing nationalist Indian politician, BJP guy. And you talk to these guys sometimes, and they will, particularly if they've had a few drinks, be more honest about things than they maybe are in their political speeches. And he said to me, India is a unique place. We have something here they don't have anywhere else in the world. This is the only place that has poor Indians. There are no poor Indians in the United States or in Europe or anywhere else. And we send people all over the world, and they flourish, and they do fine. And my knowledge of the African diaspora community in the United States is not very deep, but I've never met any poor Nigerians in the United States. And I know a fair number of Nigerians. You don't meet a lot of poor African immigrants in the United States. I mean, there's some, obviously. Every immigrant community has poverty like every other community does. But people do tend to flourish. And now, partly there's a little bit of selection bias, I think, there, in the sense that the people who make it from North Korea to the United States have some grit. Those people have some spark, and they're maybe not, sort of Joe Average. And that's, I think, certainly true of people from a lot of the other places in the world as well. But that does that does refute the thesis of there's something wrong with these places, there's something wrong with the people, there's something in the water, that these places were just meant to be poor, and they're certainly not. And what I would like to see, and what I'd like to see us maybe talk more about in the kind of advocacy community, is that human aspect to it. That there's 1.4 billion people, or however many in India. There are however many people living in poverty in Africa right now still, that could be leading lives that are radically different in ways that would enrich them and their communities and their countries and the rest of the world. That doesn't get to happen because there's this blanket that's on top of everything, this kind of suffocating blanket of poverty that gets stuck there, as you said, in large part because capital wants to be loved. And capital goes where it is loved, and places that are very, very highly regulated tend not to be super capital friendly. And because we're rich in this part of the world, and the people who dominate the policymaking conversation come from that world, we think about things like in terms of Dickens and these horrible conditions for children doing work in these Victorian factories, which were horrible and true. It was, but compared to what? One of the few things I think that is almost a universally true rule of human development is that given a choice between subsistence agriculture and literally anything else, people will typically choose literally anything else. And of course, that sort of subsistence agriculture and life that is adjacent to it in villages and cities around the world is the thing from which people are fleeing. And a lot of the regulation that we see that keeps people from developing their human potential and the human capital is obviously well-intentioned. We want to see people in jobs that have some security. We want them to have health care benefits. We want to make sure they make a decent wage and they're not exploited and all that. But of course, the downside, the trade-off that we don't want to acknowledge is that these things have the effect of just cutting people out of that marketplace entirely. It's like the minimum wage, where if your value on the marketplace isn't where the statutory minimum wage is, you're just not going to work. Economically speaking, you're just not going to be an employable person. And so we've got a tension there, I think, between these, well-intentioned, humane instincts that lead to that kind of regulation and the need to allow people to innovate and develop at the level where they are to get where we want them to be, or where they want to be, more important. And there are some steps between African poverty and life in Germany that don't necessarily all look good outside in the rest of the world. If you're kind of halfway between those two things and you're an American and you look at that and go, that doesn't look like a very good life. But it's a life that you're at on a particular point in the story of human economic development and national economic development that you have to let it play out because there's no way to get from A to B without going through there.
That's right.
We can pretend like there was a question mark at the end of that. And so you started your soft drink company, and you started some other businesses as well. What were the other ones?
So the other ones were skincare companies, and my third one is a skincare company as well, Skinny Skin. But the initiative my latest initiative, in addition to those, is the creation of what we call the prosperous cities. So, once I understood that regulations were the problem, and that these rotten business environments that we have in Africa are the problems, that if I can unlock that, then we unlock a whole new journey, right, for us. Then I became very serious about understanding what is economic freedom, how does it work. I started becoming much more serious about policies and reforms and all of that, and just had to really, geek out on all of that. And eventually, once I understood, okay, these policy reforms are what's needed, what needs to happen, who around the world is working on these issues? Who is working on that, right? So being an entrepreneur is great. I'm practicing. I'm being a practitioner of what seems to be the solution. But me alone, I can only do that great. We need many more people who are able to do the same, if not more, as I do, because it's going to be we need a critical mass. And so the first step of a journey on that, in terms of policy reforms, took me to connecting with Atlas Network, because they focus on, it's the largest organization of think tank, free market think tanks around the world, and working with many free market think tanks in Africa as well. And eventually there I became a director for the African Center for Prosperity. Now all the centers were all turned into fellows. I'm a senior fellow there, still working on these issues. And that's great. Our partners are doing amazing work, right? Doing amazing work. And at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, but we gotta find a way to accelerate all of this. We gotta find a bold way to go about all of this, because while we're doing piecemeal legislation, which is very much needed, don't take me wrong, very much needed, and we're having successes, at the same time, it's going, while we're spending all of this time dealing with this reform, maybe 10 more have popped up over there. It's just, and meanwhile, I've got millions and millions and millions of young people coming to an age of work on a continent that is lacking it sorely. So we've got a ticking bomb. This is not sustainable. And I think Europe is seeing it now. I remember I gave a talk at MIT 12, 15 years ago to some, and I told them, I said, look, if we don't pay more attention, and if we don't become more serious about the diagnosis as to why Africa is still the poorest region in the world, because I've been saying this thing for the past 15 years, Kevin. I'm getting to a point I'm tired, but I think now we're getting traction, right? So I told these people, I said, this is because some of them were more focused on the students there that were thinking about spending a career on Africa, they were still more on the aid route and those type of things, like social entrepreneurship. It all sounded great, but I was telling them, guys, we're gonna need something more than that. And I was telling them economic freedom is basically this systemic issue, because you want to talk about systemic issues, that's one systemic issue I see. So we better pay attention to this, because if we don't, this is not going to stop. The poverty in Africa is not going to stop. And if it doesn't stop, together with, a demographic gain that's going faster than other places, at some point, what you're going to see is what happens in Africa is going to change the face of European nations, not just in sense of how many people are coming and where they're coming from, and but also in terms of even your politics, everything. Because I predicted back then that they would be seeing the rise of very, very far rights, parties coming to power, having promised voters, hey, we'll get you rid of these pesky immigrants, because that's how many of them talk about us. I'll get you rid of them, and so vote for me, we'll kick them out. And so that's what's been happening. You have whatever you could, Giorgia Meloni, you have Viktor Orban, and I know that in the American right, some people think it's all just fine, but to me, I think I have a problem with both sides of the aisle, as long as we don't have that human compassion of trying to really see what is it that can be done. It's not about America solving the problems of Africans. It's not about that. But it's about understanding, or the Europeans solving the problems of Africans. But it's about at least being honest about the diagnosis of what's going on, and joining hands with our brothers and sisters that are from halfway across the world, and say, hey, you're no different than us. We're no better than you. We just happen to have a better running system, a system that's truly, it's universal. This is a system for man to go from poverty to prosperity. It's not an invention of ours necessarily or whatever. And we wanna trade. We wanna trade with you. We wanna do all of those good things. So understanding that, rather than looking at these immigrants as a peon for votes, the left saying, hey, sanctuary cities and all of you who believe like us, vote for us, and that's how we're gonna help these people. The right being like, these pesky people, you sign for us and we'll build the wall or whatever that is, and we'll kick them out. Now, soon it's going to be like mass deportations. Who knows how the hell that's going to go. But anyway, I understand that nations want to protect their borders. I totally get that, right? Although for me, I would have different opinions on all of that. But I totally respect and understand that a nation wants to have its borders. Now, all I'm saying is, if we want peace, where everybody is where, like most Senegalese are in Senegal, most Americans are in, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be very hard to keep immigration under control. I don't care who you are. I don't know what nation, I don't care what nation you are. If we have this massive discrepancy of prosperity between nations, as long as that's the case, you are going to have people saying, I need to get the hell out. At the risk of my life, I don't care what it takes, I will do it. As a matter of fact, this nation was built on people who had the same, views of, it's not working for me over here, I gotta go. So humans will do that as they should. We're not gonna stay somewhere and just die there because, so this is gonna keep happening. Now, if we have to all be smart, the more peace will be reached if more nations are raised to a critical level of prosperity. It doesn't mean that you have to be as rich as the Americans per se, but we do know that there's a threshold, right? So my point is, we have to be really smart, all of us, and see what is it that we can do together, all of us, to try and promote prosperity building in as many nations as we can, especially in the global south. So that's a message that I feel is oftentimes forgotten. It's great that you say, great or not great, doesn't matter what you think of a mass deportations that they're talking about bringing, or it doesn't matter what you think about people promoting sanctuary cities. I say, anybody who truly cares needs to be asking the question, how can we support these people to be able to stay home? Because I will tell you one thing, Kevin, it takes something extraordinary for a group of humans to leave their home behind, leave their culture behind, leave everything that they know, leave the only language that they know how to speak behind, and just decide to go to another place. It takes something radical for them to do that. And given a choice, this is my story and I'm sticking to it. Given a choice, most people would prefer to stay home. Most people. And I'm not seeing anybody talking really about that. We're just talking about, enforcing the border, which again, I understand all of that. But to me, the ultimate way to protect anyone's border is to make sure that people don't have the need or the desire to cross the border in the first place. And the best way to do that is that home is home. Home is happening. Home is great. Home, I can build a life for my child, for myself, and because nobody wants to raise their kids away from the grandma or anything like that. So my point is, can we spend some time on that? And I see a new dawn for America. You see, there is a real wonderful opportunity here for Americans to do something very different in terms of foreign policy. And this is where I am going to use this opportunity to also send this message that's very clear in my mind, and I'm shocked that others don't see it. If the United States is very interested in remaining the powerful nation that it is, and I'm all for it. Like I said, I love this country. It's mine. I'm a proud American as well. It's mine, and I will do whatever it takes to support this nation with everything that I've got anytime. And if we want to remain this powerful nation and keep moving ahead and reach higher heights, I think we also, and play this and have remain very strong geopolitically speaking, America can no longer afford to ignore Africa. I understand that Africa is a single digit, represents a single digit trade in the world, volume of trade in the world. So it means it's meaningless for most nations, especially for like this country. But let me make this case for you. Africa has the youngest population in the world. By 2050, 1/4 of the world's population will be African. 1 out of 4 people walking this earth will be African. By 2100, it's going to be half of the world's population that's going to be walking this earth. So now imagine an America that's working very hard right now to be strong, especially now they're about to get into this frontal, this frontal engagement with China, and Trump has his way. He has a way he has planned to go about it. Again, I won't go into the merit of the solutions or whatever they're going to do, because that's not my point here. But my point is, if your goal is to remain the strong nation, and if your goal is to remain geopolitically, meaningful, I think a war is battled not only in the physical realm, but also there is also this whole other dimension of winning hearts and minds. And this is one thing that I liked hearing from J.D. Vance when he said, look, we shouldn't rely, being a strong power should not be relying just on your, how many weapons you have, how strong your army is and all of that, right? But the other route too is people being able to do trade with people, creating trade partners, real ones. I understand with the China model, there are, some rules on it being respected. I get all of that. I get that. But in this case, think about it. Here you are saying, we're gonna go head to head against China. Fine. Except that China has never forgotten Africa. They haven't. So you have the Chinese, it's not just, the roads, the infrastructure, it's not just that's happening in Africa. There is the sharing of the Chinese ways of looking at the world. There are Confucius schools being built all over the continent. They're dealing with us at a whole nother level. Americans, they're just like, send us pittance, foreign aid, pittance, which goes nowhere. So right now, when you look at in Africa, what's going on from the rest of the world, the geopolitics, how it's going. Europe, their relationship to us, especially the French, it's basically them. They come and they supposedly protect our countries in exchange for us giving them prime access to pretty much everything. whether it's our natural resources, letting their multinationals be the lay of the land, be only ones having grocery stores, or who knows what else. That's the deal. We are going to protect the integrity of your country, security-wise, weapons, we have bases, supposedly we're protecting you. In exchange, we do that. In something like that, the ordinary African can tell you that I'm not seeing myself evolving economically speaking in this deal. They might tell me that, yeah, whatever, but economically speaking, I'm not getting better off. I'm still getting on my boat, I'm still leaving. The Russians, the deal with us is, and dear leader, I'm going to protect you against your own, forces. I'm going to protect you against your own police, against your own military, should they have a bad idea to do a coup against you because you're so worthless and so bad at everything you do that the people want to just get rid of you, and the putschists are ready for that. So we're going to protect you against your own people. In exchange, you're going to give us your natural resources as well. In a deal like that, the ordinary African is not seeing anything for themselves. So they keep getting on the boats and they keep trying to get the hell out. The Chinese come and they say, dear leader, we're going to build you the roads. We're going to give you all of this money that the Westerners have said that they're not going to, but now they were going to give to you, but it's going to be strings attached. They're patronizing you. They're telling you what to do because they're tired of you stealing the money. But us, we don't care. You need a road? It's going to cost you $1 million to make it. I'm just making up numbers. Need a road? $1 million? Well, we give you $1 million, no question asked. We don't care that you're the worst, authoritarian Earth has ever carried. It doesn't matter. We give you the 1 million, but in exchange, you give us that contract to build the road. So it means you're going to pay us back that money plus interest and whatever because it was a loan. If you can't, it's ours. We're going to go after your organs, the organs of your country, ports, airports, whatever. Nothing to lose there for them. But you know what? We're not going to ask you questions, nothing. So, done. So, in a deal like that, the Chinese are doing their thing. The CCP, I like to say, doing their thing because most companies, Chinese companies and businesses happening from China on the continent a lot of it is financed by the CCP from back in China. In deals like that, the ordinary African can tell you, yeah, it's true, I have better roads, whatever, hospitals, whatever. But you know what? I'm still not being better off economically speaking. I'm still going to get on that damn boat and leave. So this is the foreign policies of these three major, blocks of the world when it comes to Africa. The Americans, though, nowhere to be seen. It's just like, we send you, remittances in the form of foreign aid, nothing. So, and once in a while, we'll show up and there's going to be some war here, who knows. And in my case, I'm saying, look, America, this is your opportunity to come and work with Africans in a way that no one has worked with Africans before. No one, since the end of colonialism. Come and work with Africans by doing business with Africans. Come see if your foreign policy can be along the lines of these prosperous cities. You are now going to be promoting the creation of these zones that are going to have their own law, their own governance when it comes to business only. We're not touching family law, not touching, immigration laws or any of that stuff because really that's a privy of the sovereignty of a nation. So insofar as we said that prosperity is built by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs need a business environment, all you need to touch is a business environment. You don't have to sit there and tell people how to live their lives or anything like that. Change the business environments and the result will come. So if America was smart enough to make that its policy, amazing things happen. Because now we are going to see the ordinary African is going to see their life go from nothing to everything they could ever have wished for. Now this is the only deal, the only relationship where the ordinary African is able to make a life at home. This has not happened yet. And on top of that, well, guess what? This is the best way you can teach people about freedom. Because now they're the direct recipients of these concepts we talk about in the abstract. The free market, they're living it, they're in it. They get to love and learn, love freedom and liberty as we talk about it all the time. Do you really think now, given the choice between that and the ways of control and everything that the CCP might extol on people, which one do you think people really might want to go for? And here you enter hearts and minds in a way that no one can fight you on, because people are living it in their bones. People are seeing the difference in their lives. It's real. And then now, all of a sudden, the youngest population in the world shares values with you of liberty, freedom, free markets, all of that. And if tomorrow is going to be the 1/4 of the world population is Africans, well, it's that many more people who are advocating for that philosophy of life. And when it's half of the world population, it's even more. If you don't do this, what you're going to have, it's the opposite. The youngest population of the world thinking that the CCP way is the way. Later, 1/4 of the world population thinking it's the way. Later, half of the world population, it's the way. You think you've had a problem today? Think again. So this is really what I myself has been very excited about in terms of, guys, this is really what this country, America, should be doing. And that would be without a single bullet fired. That would have been without patronizing anybody. It's the good old ways of humans using the market to get to know each other better, to get to know each other's cultures better, to mix, to do all types of things together, and together build a better world. To me, this truly is the better story. And no one has done it yet. No one.
There are three very American things about you. One is the centrality of entrepreneurship to your vision of the world. The second is that you've got a lot of good ideas for a government that's probably not going to listen to you, because it doesn't. But the most American thing about you, at least in terms of what you've said today, is that when you had a personal spiritual crisis, you had it in Big Sur. And going to Big Sur and having a crisis is a great American tradition from Jack Kerouac onward from there. And I think that is a tradition worth defending. If I decide to have a personal crisis, I'm going to do it in Big Sur too. And it's a great place to do it. I feel like we could probably talk for another hour or two, but we've hit the limit of our time, I think, and then some. So, Magatte Wade, thank you so much, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Likewise, it was very fun.